Hi everyone, I'm Lisa Chase with Back to Normal Physical Therapy, and today I wanted to talk to you about athletic performance and recovery. I've spent a majority of time in my career working with athletes of all levels, and I really find that there's a commonality when clients come in, particularly athletes, and they're injured. There are certain trends and things that I can pick up, and one of the things I talk to all of my athletes about is my sports health wheel. And I really try to identify where there are gaps in their training or in their recovery. So I wanted just to walk you through that a little bit today. So the first thing that's really important is visualization and commitment. And with any athlete who's really determined to compete at a high level, they visualize their goal. By making that visualization and committing to it, they're committing to what they need to do in order to execute basically their performance. So I usually don't have to work with athletes too much on that because they typically already come in and they're ready to go. They just want to be able to compete and they want to get out of pain. One of my specialties is really looking at movement and their conditioning. So how athletes move is super important, and if they have poor movement patterns, it's very hard to start to build a foundation of strength, of agility, of coordination. So what I try to look at is how athletes are moving, and I try to restore the movement patterns, and from there then I can work with strength and conditioning specialists to then look at all the different pieces of strength and conditioning and build that on the foundation of a healthy movement pattern. Next is technique and skill. Again, not in my area of expertise, but I like to work with coaches and athletes to see if we can determine, is there a technique or skill strategy that is getting in their way? So I always like to ask, hey, what are you working on with your coach? For example, if it's a tennis player and I'm looking at their movements and I see that they can't rotate to the left side, I may ask them, hey, are you having a difficulty, getting to your backhand? Or are you late on your backhand? That will kind of clue us all in. Is it more of a movement issue that's not allowing them to have the best technique, or is it just a faulty technique pattern? So from there, I like to then work with the coach and with the athlete to have to include that into their training program as we're retraining the movements. But technique and skill sometimes is the missing link. Next, competitive training schedule. One of my favorite topics. Athletes do one thing. They train, and they train hard. They love to train. They love to compete. The problem is if they don't have a really good balance of training and recovery, they get in trouble. So we have to really look at their training schedule and help to guide them through where can they put some breaks, how do they boost their recovery? What training are they doing? Are they only doing, for a runner, for example, are they only running? Or are they doing some other things like cross training? Perhaps a CrossFit or Pilates. There are other things that you can do to balance out your body so you're not driving the same patterns over and over again. So training schedule is really important, and oftentimes we'll use a training diary to help me identify patterns that we need to work on. All right. Warm up and recovery. So those are probably where I spend the most of my time educating athletes. So a warm-up is so critical, and I would say probably the majority of my athletes, when I say, what does your warm-up look like? They usually will say to me, it involves stretching. I say, well, what kind of stretching? Well, usually it's a passive stretch. That means they're holding a stretch. So for example, if I wanted to stretch my hamstring and I was just doing this and I'm holding, that is considered a passive stretch. And research really shows that athletes that are doing a lot of static stretching before a competition or activity actually decrease their performance, puts them more at risk. Why? Because the muscle's not warm yet, right? So what we're getting ready to do, if we're gonna go run, then we need to warm up our muscles, doing more of a dynamic movement. So movements that are gonna mimic the running. and get the muscle warm. So we want to do slower, more rhythmical movements, and then mimic those kind of dynamic stretching to prepare the muscle to get ready for performance. Then when we're ready for our stretching, our passive stretching, that's going to happen after competition, after practice, after training. Now we pull in, the muscle's nice and warm, you've got lots of blood flow to the muscle. Now what I want to do is I want to stretch. I want to passively stretch that muscle. And the other things that you can use in your recovery is using a massage stick, using a foam roller. If you have access to a massage therapist, building in massage into your recovery strategy is super, super helpful to help restore and recover that muscle. And we're going to talk about shortly nutrition. So what you put in your body both before and after are critical to how your body's going to recover. So those are the kinds of things that you really want to consider, and then building in your recovery days. And recovery days, you need at least one day during the week where you're not doing anything. You're just completely taking off. But you can also have an active recovery day. So what does that look like? How about yoga? Taking a yoga class. That would be fine, a restorative yoga or a movement class where you're stretching, you're breathing, and you're really helping your body to recover. So I know athletes don't like to hear, I want you to take a break, but you can take an active break and still help your body tremendously. Environment. So this varies depending on your sport. I worked in professional tennis for close to 10 years, so environment was pretty critical. In the heat, so if you're playing in the heat or even indoors, for example, depending on the atmosphere, it can create issues like heat illness. And hydration and what you put in your body is super important, and the environment is gonna kind of dictate that. So you want to just kind of be prepared if you're traveling someplace where you're in a different time zone, or you're out west versus coming east, and the humidity might be different, the temperatures might be different. Getting acclimatized to that region, going a day or two before, is very helpful. So just considering the environment and what types of things you can do to be prepared in that environment so your body is ready and adapted to perform. Okay. Nutrition and hydration. So this is probably, I think, between recovery strategies and nutrition, they're probably the two areas I find most that athletes kind of poo-poo, or they just kind of forget about it, or they don't have time for. But it is so important. So how I describe this to an athlete is, imagine that your body is a race car. And if you want that race car to perform at its best, you need to fuel it. And that means good proteins, good carbohydrates, the right kinds of carbohydrates that are going to help to fuel your body, water, those types of things before, during, and after, and the timing of those are super critical. So we ask a lot of questions about that, and then we work with our nutritional therapist, who's an expert in really looking at the pieces of nutrition. How do we combat inflammation, for example? Athletes, when they're training super hard, they're tearing down muscle. So you need to help that muscle repair and recover so you can continue to perform and decrease your risk of injury. Stress. So stress comes in all sorts of forms and shapes, and some of it is internal stressors that we put on ourselves to perform. For high-level athletes who have sponsors, for example, that could be something that could be stressful. They may have lots of demands on them internally and externally, from coaches to parents to a tournament director to media, being able to give an interview. So really identifying what the stressors are, and honestly engaging in a sports psychologist could be super helpful, just to really identify, like, well, where are those missing gaps? When I was on the tour, what we oftentimes found was the mental aspect was oftentimes 80%, and when you could address that piece of it, the athlete went to the next level, because we were teaching them all these things. But how athletes manage stress, can really play a huge role in how they perform. All right, and then last but not least, sleep. So sleep is very important. Depending on your age, you may need more sleep, but for an athlete, getting at least 8, sometimes 9 hours, especially younger athletes, of sleep is super critical. That is a time when our body is resting, it's repairing, and it's preparing for the next day. So then I guess the last part is the medical and health, and that is just how oftentimes athletes come in. So we want you to stay healthy, and we want you to perform your best, and these are some of the things that you should really try to consider. Build a team. There's no one person who can do it all. Really building a team that can help you identify and look at all these things, and who are willing to work together to help you perform your best, is what we're all about at Back to Normal. So I hope you enjoyed that, and we look forward to seeing you at game day.